Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about what's been going on out here. You know, we had the whole COVID-19 thing, and that was something that was, and it still is, having a very heavy impact on society. What people are doing, you still have a lot of people who are unemployed, and people whose jobs won't come back because certain businesses closed out, and because they are closed down, and because they closed down, there's no real means for them to come back, or they don't have people that they can customers. So, I mean, there's a lot going on out there, and with that, and then of course with what we've been seeing with George Floyd, with the horrible incident with his death, and how people have reacted to that. And then of course, if that wasn't enough, yesterday another man got shot, and they decided to burn down the Wendy's. I don't get it, but he was shot out in front of a Wendy's, so they burned down the Wendy's. And it's just, another one of those things that is just, people's nerves are raw anyway. And, one of the things that I'm sure in time to come, when they're able to do some studies, investigations, whatever you want to call it, research, that they'll realize that even though it may have been necessary for a time to do this quarantine thing, or to whatever degree or level they accept it as being acceptable, that it has an effect on people. And, people are locked up in their homes for long periods of time, and then these same people then, they're already angry at their local governments for keeping them locked up and prohibiting them, and they're angry with each other, because you got people on either end of the spectrum. You go back and you look at the news reports, and you see on one hand where the news is screaming that these people are going out there and they're protesting about being quarantined, and how can they just care so little about their family? Don't you care about your grandmother? You're out there affecting yourself with this COVID, and you're going to bring it back to your home, and so they're angry at each other, because some people are saying, look, I don't accept this, and I want to get out there, and other people are like, what's wrong with you? So you already got this whole boiling thing going. And then of course the incident with George Floyd takes place, and it was his horrible death, and then what transpires after that. So oftentimes when preachers are considering what to preach on, it's important that they focus on things that are taking place at the time, because it's on people's minds. It's what they're thinking about. And so it's important for us to try to understand as Christians from a biblical perspective what is taking place, what's transpiring, and then try to find a godly solution within His Word as to how we should be handling this situation. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to take a look at what I really see is the problem that's taking place out there. I've been in a discussion with a brother in the church here locally, and we've been going back and forth, having differing views on what is transpiring, and especially looking at the George Floyd incident and how we should approach that as Christians. And one of the things that I brought up when I ended the discussion, I said, I think the issue that people miss is that we're dealing with an individual problem. We're dealing with an individual problem. Is that on? Hey, Rick, is the?
Yeah, I heard it.
Can you hear it? Oh, okay. So we're dealing with the individual problems, and I think sometimes people miss that when they look at a problem that's happening, especially if you consider what may be seen as something as a broad national issue or worldwide issue, or however you want to put it, that's taking place. And ultimately what it boils down to is an individual problem. It boils down to individuals. And when you understand that, then you begin to deal with the situation in that way, rather than trying to tackle something that is being perceived as this massive problem. You lose sight of the tree in the forest. It's the tree that you want to cut down. You don't want to burn the forest. You want to get rid of the tree, this one tree that's the problem, right? And what happens is that because people sit back and they just see this big problem, or it's made into this massive systemic problem, then they just want to burn the whole thing down. And rather than stepping back and saying, it's an individual issue. And I have no question that whatever we see out there is all an individual issue. Now, some may say, yes, but it's involved in a lot of facets, right? But it's still carried out by individuals. That's why you can't make sweeping statements that condemn entire groups of people based upon the actions of the individuals. You don't burn down the forest because one tree is sick. You get rid of the sick tree. And so rather than, and look, there may be a lot of sick trees, okay? But you still don't just gut the entire thing if you don't have to. There may be a time when you have to do that. It's just so infected, you've got to get rid of it. But I don't believe that is where we are. And when you look at the issue that I'm dealing with, yes?
Well, when you're talking about that, I read an article today, I sent it out to a lot of people, about a Jewish fellow that demanded apologies from BLM for the fact that some of the Jewish people were killed with hate crimes from black people. It makes absolutely no sense, like you said, to go after a group, because he was just doing it in the reverse way. We could all do that, and it's ridiculous.
So, and what I want to focus on is, rather than bringing up names of groups and so forth like that, I'm trying to avoid that. I want to just stick with the issue here. And what I think people miss, and I believe so, especially in the world, is that this whole problem is a sin problem. That's what it boils down to, right? It boils down to sin. It boils down to hate. It boils down to greed, whatever it may be. And because of that, each individual is responsible for their own actions. It goes all the way back to the garden, right? Yes, we may take a look at the fact that Adam and Eve were the ones who violated the will of God, and in doing so, brought death into the world through sin. But we also understand that sin is always an individual choice, right? As a matter of fact, take a look over in James chapter 1. James makes it very clear that these issues are coming from within each individual. Now, there may be groups of individuals, right? They may all have the same sinful behavior put together in a group. And I understand that. It's not as if you can't group people together. But it's still, the group is made up of individuals. So this thing doesn't exist on its own without the individual bringing it about. So in James chapter 1, beginning in verse 13, let no one say, when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Notice how he says here in verse 14, but each one is tempted when each one is tempted. So in other words, yes, you may have a forest of problems out there, or a forest of a problem, a group, all holding to a particular view. But it's an individual issue because each one has determined that they're going to believe this, they're going to hold to this, they're going to practice this. It's all individual. And so, and sadly in our society, what happens is too often innocents, the innocent individuals, those who do not hold to a particular idea, are thrown into that group just because they happen to be amongst them. And so when you take a look and we look at the police force, you can't label everybody in that group in the same way. Because a police force is a massive group of people. We're talking city. We're talking sheriff's department, right? We're not dealing with just your local police force. You're dealing with people who are actually detectives and then patrol officers. It's a massive group of people out there. So when you're looking at that, it's dangerous to just throw a blanket statement out there and try to burn down the forest because you don't like a couple of trees that are ill, sick, spreading a disease, however you want to put it. So what we need to do and what people aren't doing, and I know what I'm going to talk about here is specific to Christians, but I believe it's a good starting point for people who've yet to accept Christ to step back and ask themselves, why are these things happening? What is causing this stuff to happen? And granted, if you are not a believer in God and you don't believe in the devil, then you're going to say, it's that person, it's these people, it's this, it's what you're going to blame it on. And but I'm a firm believer in God, and I'm a firm believer in Satan. And I believe that the devil is very active. Amen. And because of this activity, people are allowing him to get into their minds and to convince them of particular things that continually create unrest, division, and ultimately the loss of those people's souls.
The fact that the Bible isn't taught anymore and most people are ignorant of it, they don't understand that they're in spiritual warfare
yes.
against Satan. They don't understand what's actually going on.
Exactly. When we take a look at Ephesians chapter 6, going off of what Ken is saying here, that there is a spiritual warfare going on. If you don't believe in God, then you just see it as a warfare between, skin colors or ethnic backgrounds or social, economical standings. It's a class warfare, however you want to call it. And it's attacked from different angles. And there's different battles out there because you got this one battle and you knock that one down, but here's another battle. If it's not racism, then it's classism and so forth. If it's not classism, then it's elitism. Who's elites, the intelligentsia, ruling over all of us ignorant people out here. So there's always some kind of division going on.
Mostly stupidity.
Say that again?
It's mostly stupidity.
Well, and it's a lack of awareness of really what's going on. You've got to stop and educate yourself on why this is happening. And again, if you don't believe in God, you're just going to say it's because this is the way you are. You just hate me because I have money. You hate me because of where I live. You hate me because of how I act, the things my culture, my skin color. It's not just one thing. There's a myriad of reasons people don't like each other. But I think if you can actually put a face on it, then you can begin to work on the real issue. The real issue is sin as perpetrated in the life of humanity through the work of Satan. And if we understand that, then we begin to deal with the problem and not a symptom of the problem. And that's typically what we're seeing out here is people trying to deal with a symptom of the problem. It's the idea of when you look at inequality, wealth inequality. People simply look at that as you're greedy and I don't have anything and you want to keep me down, you're wealthy, I'm not, rather than looking at it from the biblical perspective and understanding the sin of greed. And if this individual is greedy, it's a sinful act. Now, how do you handle that? You cannot regulate greed out of somebody. You can tax the wealthy to the ends of heaven, and that's not going to change them from being greedy people. And that's what we try to do. We try to attack a sin problem with worldly concepts. Let's attack it. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this. But you're missing the issue. You attack the problem one individual at a time. You attack the problem by helping people to understand what sin is and why it's wrong to hold to that view, why it's wrong to believe this way, why it's wrong to act that way, as established by not your local government, not your own moral views, not what you think is okay, but as according to the creator of the universe. Because see, now we have a higher source that we are accountable to. Now, I guarantee you this, not everybody's going to accept it. You're never going to get rid of greed. You're never going to get rid of hate. You're never going to get rid of theft. You're never going to get rid of fornication, adultery, drunkenness, racism. You cannot get rid of those things because sin is in the world. And it will be here until the Lord comes back. So you're always going to be dealing with those things. So you have to figure out how to live in a world that will always be sinful. I don't care how much you want this to be a Star Trek universe where everybody's just getting along together and we have no issues and we don't even have money anymore and we're all just living on a starship somewhere and we go up to a machine and talk and it gives us our food and our clothes are provided, our housing's provided, everything's provided for us because we're all living in some utopia. You know what's funny is when you look at things like that, I don't know if you've ever watched Star Trek that much before. For a world, a society that's supposed to have developed into this perfect utopia, they sure do fight a lot. It's like, you guys are always fighting something, somewhere, somebody. So your perfect utopia doesn't even exist in your perfect utopia. And I think it's kind of what we're seeing over here in Seattle. I'm like, you guys, you don't believe in walls, but you put up barriers to keep people from coming in. You don't believe in borders, but you cordoned off your section, your little Chaz area, not Chad, Chaz area, so now you have borders. You don't believe in police just IDing you whenever they want, but you keep IDing people when they try to come in. Do you live here? You don't let anybody just come walking across your street to come into your neighborhood, and you complain that people out there in our society, you're doing exactly what you complain about. Why? Because you realize that in society, there has to be certain things for order to exist. You can't just make up some, hey, hippie flower, let's sit down and drink some tea and play some music and everything will be fine. Because I'm telling you, the gangbangers are enjoying this. They're waiting for the moment that they can just roll on into your neighborhood and start popping caps on you and taking what you got. You can't go to your local businesses and extort them for money for protection, which is what they're doing in their new utopian society. You see, that's the problem. They cannot get away from what they hate. Why? Because it's within them. It is the way people live. We live in sin. And when you have God out of your life, you can get rid of that which you don't like, but then you just do it yourself. You have to. You have to have doors on your house. You have to have someone out there who is willing to protect society from those who want to take what you have and harm you.
They're against government, but yet in there
they've got their own. Who's your leader?
And they're deporting people. They're doing everything
that they hate.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, who's your leader? We don't have a leader. Okay. Right. So, in Ephesians chapter 6, and again, it all goes back to, that's why they can't escape doing what they hate. Because they are people who are going to create the same problems as the people they hate create. Because it's called sin. And it's an individual choice. And we all get caught up in it to certain degrees. Christians have made a choice to seek to live a life absent of that. Not that we do, not that we don't fall short, 1 John chapter 2, not that we don't fall short and sin, but we seek to live a life where we don't allow Satan to rule our lives. And we understand the battle. In Ephesians chapter 6, look what down in verse 11, or verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Friends, brethren, this whole shenanigan is the schemes of the devil. He's loving it. He's loving it. Pitting people against people over money, over the color of their skin, over things they do and don't do. He's loving it. Fight with one another, because as long as you're fighting, you'll never see the love of God. All you'll develop is a hate, and you'll pass it on to your generations. Your children will have it, and your children's children will have it. Because it's like if you take a look over at Israel and you take a look over at Jordan and you look at those places over there, they have fought for so long, they've forgotten what they've been fighting for, but they know this: we hate each other. Because yesterday you killed my uncle, and a year ago you killed my dad, and 5 years ago you killed my grandpa, and 10 years ago you killed my great-grandpa, or somebody I was related to. And so it's always a vindictive attitude. One fighting against, constantly attacking each other over things that have long passed. And as long as you continue to stay there, you never learn the love of God. And so you will always be at war with one another. So we're told to put on the full armor of God, that we'll be able to stand firm against the wiles of, or the schemes of the devils. Now, in the King James, I believe the word is wiles there, wily ways of the devil. Those wiles of the devil actually denotes a deceitful, a cunning device. Schemes. When you look at how Satan works, he works in a very deceptive way. Oftentimes, you will believe that what you're doing is a just cause because you believe injustice has been perpetrated against you. And so what you do is you carry out justice in an ungodly way. Now, you may feel vindicated. You may say, hey, you know what, I've been deprived for so long, I don't mind if I bust into a Walmart and take my 75-inch big screen TV and my Nike tennis shoes. You know, because you know what Nike said? Just do it. Nike said just do it. So I went and did it. So I'm going to go and I feel vindicated because I've been oppressed. Well, all you're doing is you're trying to solve a scheme of the devil, be it greed, be it racism, whatever. You're trying to solve it with another scheme of the devil. And you're never getting anywhere. You're never moving forward because you're always stuck in this perpetual scheme of the devil. Satan is a relentless adversary. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 tells us that he's a what? He's a roaring lion, right? Seeking whom he may devour. No, he's not going to cuddle up to you and purr. And, oh, hey. He wants to consume you, mind and soul. He wants your heart. And so what he will do is he will pit humanity against itself. And when he does that, then we will end up giving into his schemes, and he will end up taking control of us because we've given ourselves over to his control. So we have to resist. We have to resist. In James chapter 4, and this is, you know, it's a different mindset when it comes to resisting. I hear this from our brethren, and I understand, okay, as much as I possibly can, but I understand it. And look, this is what I always do. I don't have to experience what you've experienced to understand what you're experiencing. Now, I know people say, no, wait, let me explain why. Because my perspective is, it doesn't matter what you experience, if it is against God, it is sin. And I don't have to understand every intricate in and out of that sin to understand what you're going through. I understand that there's a battle for your soul going on out there. And how it's perpetrated doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter how Satan is perpetrating the battle against your soul. It doesn't matter if it's through racism, if it's through greed, if it's through covetousness, if it's through murder, rape. It doesn't matter how it's perpetrated. Because we get to focusing on these little things and we lose sight that Satan is out there working on souls to destroy us. And we forget to look at who actually is in charge, and that's God, and who can lead us to victory, and that is God. When you go back and you take a look at what we often read in 1 Peter about the persecution of the Christians, God didn't go through and try to solve every little individual issue they were having. He didn't go through and say, "No, wait a minute, you're going to have some struggles because of this, and you're going to have some struggles because of that." He wasn't trying to run in and solve every little individual issue that they were facing. What he was trying to let them know is you're going to go through this. But you've got to learn how to handle yourself while you go through this. So whether someone is out there being greedy, whether someone is out there being a racist individual, whatever it is, we as Christians learn how to handle those situations without it consuming us. Because if you let that problem consume you, then you will fall into the scheme of Satan and you will work his plans. You will go out there and do what he wants you to do because you are no longer focusing on the fact that this is sin and you need to overcome this. And sometimes it means you will deal with it the rest of your life. Christians will deal with being hated by the world the rest of our lives. We don't look for a time in our existence where all of a sudden the world is going to wake up and go, "We love you guys." We don't look for that. We learn to live within it. Correct? What did he tell them in 1 Peter? He didn't tell them how to run away from it or how to stop the people. He didn't tell them, "This is what you need to do to stop them. Burn their houses down. Burn their buildings down. That's what you need to do to stop it." Because it won't stop it. You know, all it will do is pass it on to the next generation. He said, you've got to learn to live within it. We are in the world, but we are not of the world. So we have to live in this mess. Christians do. We have to live with greed, covetousness, racism. We have to live with that stuff. We will never stop it. We will never stop it. So, why do you think he tells us to put on the full armor of God? Why are we putting that armor on if it's just going to go away? It's not going to go away. He says you need to have put on what will protect you from what Satan is doing in the world. You see, sadly, what we see out there is people who don't know God. And so they don't have the armor of God. All they're doing is using the tools of Satan to attack one another. And they get nowhere with it. We can't be using the tools of Satan to attack one another. We are to put on the armor of God so that we can resist. What does he say to do? Resist. If we are to stand firm, if we are to resist the works of Satan, that means the works are going to be there. They're going to be ongoing until the Lord returns. But we have to stand firm, not to become what he wants us to become, what Satan wants us to become, and not to give up on our faith. We have the armor of God to keep us moving forward, even while this injustice, because there'll always be injustice, is going on.
And that's about that when it says to put on the full armor of God.
Mm-hmm.
The helmet is not going to protect you. The shield alone is not going to protect you. The sword alone is not going to protect you.
Yeah.
You have to do the full armor. Otherwise, you leave yourself open.
You leave yourself open. Yeah. And you know, I think part of that leaving ourselves open goes back to the fact that we say, yeah, I'm a Christian and I pray but I'm going to take care of this. So all of a sudden you throw something off so that you can go And you're thinking that you're okay because you got part of it on. And you can't work that way. James chapter 4 again in verse 7. Submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. So we are to resist the devil. Resist the works of the devil. Flee from what Satan is trying to do. And if we will resist him, and when I say flee from him, and draw near to God, the idea is backing away from those schemes of his, having the full armor of God on, and resisting what he wants us to do. We don't take vengeance for ourselves. That's why when you look, and look, this is the Christian life is one of the most difficult lives to live in this world. Because we are to love our enemy. Romans chapter 12. We're to love our enemy. We're not to go kill our enemy, burn down, destroy, make somebody our enemy who wasn't our enemy before, but now they are. We are to love our enemy. That defeats Satan. Satan wants you to hate the people that hate you. He wants you to despise the people who despise you. God wants us to love those that do that. To consider what their need is and do our best to help them in that need. So when we look at the devices of Satan, the plans and the schemes of Satan, what he's trying to do, resisting the devil is what's going to help us to overcome these things. Let's go back to 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. We read this, or I quoted this earlier. Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour, but resist him. Firm in your faith, or firm in faith. Firm in your faith. Knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. What is he saying? You will not escape the persecution that Satan is perpetrating upon humanity. You can't get out of that. You'll be in the midst of it. You will be subject to it. Satan will seek to harm you. But you can resist how you respond to it. You can change your attitude and how you react to what's taking place against you. He says, verse 8, be of sober spirit. If we are not watchful, then we will be devoured. Sober spirit is the idea of a temperate, dispassionate, circumspect. Think about this. A temperate, dispassionate, circumspect. In other words, we do not allow our passions to overtake us. Once one person starts chanting some mantra, everybody starts chanting it. And then they get worked up into a frenzy. Everybody's into a frenzy now. Everybody, because they're no longer dispassionate. You've got to separate yourself from the passion that you might have for this, the anger, the hate you may have. You have to be dispassionate. You have to look at it logically and recognize who actually is bringing this about. Certainly the individual is the one who's doing it, but it's because he doesn't know or she doesn't know God, doesn't know the love of God, and is allowing Satan to work through them to carry out his will, not the Father's. And so rather than becoming passionate and just overtaken by it and angry and just, I've got to stop and I've got to say, I'm here to do the will of the Father. Take a look at the life of Christ. How did he handle the brutal attacks against him? The constant attacks against his character. Even against his upbringing. Even the apostle, whoa, elitism. Excuse me, aren't these all Galileans? You know, those ignorant fishermen? They don't know anything. They're dumb. We're the smart ones. We're the Sanhedrin. You know, we're the ones who know the law. You guys are a bunch of idiots. You see, they tried to use that against them. But how did they respond to it? How did Jesus respond to it? Jesus didn't rise up against the people. He had the power to do so, but he didn't. He humbled himself, but even then, it was a righteous indignation in the temple and restrained.
But there is sometimes that we have to take a stand.
Yes. But taking a stand doesn't mean that you allow Satan to control that stand.
But you've got to decide between the two.
Yeah, you got to decide whether or not you're going to live righteously or unrighteously. Whether or not we can have a righteous indignation, we can dislike racism and elitism and fornication and drunkenness and adultery, all those things, right? How they destroy families. We can look at drug addictions and how that destroyed loved ones that we have had before. We can look at all that stuff and have an understandable righteous indignation against those things. But you don't run down the street and shoot the drug dealer because your child died of a drug overdose. Well, I'm just going to go and I'm going to take care of the problem. Because let me tell you what, if you shoot a drug dealer, you haven't solved the problem. Because there's just one waiting in the wings to come up again. It doesn't end that way. It's not like people go, well, hey, I think I'm going to stop dealing drugs because that drug dealer got killed. It doesn't work that way. Look, even when you look at our prison systems, what do we constantly see? We constantly see people being affected, and even though they're in prison, they come out, and what do they find themselves doing? They go right back to their old life, and it doesn't stop people out here in the world from doing that. Well, if we keep doing this, we might go to jail. It's sin, and it rules people's lives. And they're going to continue to do that until the Lord returns. So we need to be sober so that we do not become devoured by the work of Satan. To be of sound mind. Thayer describes this word that we find in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. We must recognize the reality of Satan and the real threat he possesses to our salvation. If we allow ourselves to be overtaken with our anger, with our frustrations, if we allow those things and we become too passionate about those things, when they begin to control us, then we act in ways that carry out the work of Satan. So we've got to step back and say, I need to let God rule my heart. I need to let the love of God be in my heart. I need to know how to deal with these situations without carrying out the schemes of Satan, thinking all the while that I am just for doing so. I'm being vindicated for doing so. You see, that's a real way to get people caught up in it, is if they think that what they're doing is justice and vindication, they can put off that it's an unrighteous act because you deserve it anyway, and I am getting what is rightfully mine. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. I've got more to say on this, but we're going to stop right there. Continue to study this, and I pray that people will have a mindset to understand that when we are looking at what is taking place in our world today, don't ever separate yourself. And I see brethren arguing about this. And the question I brought up, I said, and I even made this point in one of the discussions I had with somebody, I said, I really wish people were this passionate about evangelizing as they are standing up for a single issue.
Amen.
Right? Because evangelism is the solution to the single issue you've got. You go out, you take the gospel to people, you show them the love of God, and they become that love of God. And in that individual, you've begun the work of God to solve the problem. If they're this way, if they are a person that's living in a particular way or multiple particular ways of sin, it's only through God that they're going to come out of that. And so rather than just screaming about this and that, let's always remember that this is a battle for the souls of humanity because of sin. And let's deal with sin one individual at a time. Let me close with this real quick. And you've probably heard this before. There's a story about a lady that's walking down the beach one day, and there's all these little all these little starfish laying on the beach. You've heard this story? She's walking down the beach and she's picking these starfish up and she's throwing these, and the beach is covered with them, and she's throwing these starfish back into the water. And some guy sees her and he comes walking up to her and he goes, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "Well, I'm saving the starfish." And he goes, "Can't you see this beach?" He goes, "It doesn't matter. You can't save all of them." And she picks one up and she throws it and she goes, "It mattered to that one. It mattered to that one." No, we're not going to change everybody. God can't change everybody. But to those who want to be changed, He can. And we can be His tools to do that. If we remember the real battle we're fighting there. It's a battle of souls for humanity because of what sin is doing. All right, we'll stop there.